All right, everybody. Welcome to the stream this Sunday. Probably hear a little bit in my voice. I've got a little bit of a cold. Um, but we're going to stream today because tomorrow I got a notification from Comcast, who is my ISP, um, and they're going to be working on the internet in my area. So my internet will be very spotty tomorrow. They said I could actually expect it to be down um, until about an hour after when I normally start my stream. Um, so um, I'm not going to be streaming tomorrow night. Um, so I didn't want to miss today. Um, so and it wound up being a good day to stream anyway. As TBD gamer. Um, so so kind to say. I was just notified that I've been an affiliate with Twitch for well, it's a year now, which is kind of crazy. I don't think I'll make partner. To make partner would require it would require that I get 75 views consistently for like 6 months, and I can't even remember what the other thing is, right? And I do I do come close to hitting those numbers, but it's spread across three social media platforms now, right? I'm spread across Twitch, YouTube, and now X, Twitter. And I'm really debating even going and starting to stream to Instagram. I don't have an Instagram account, um, mainly because I just haven't had a reason to be there yet. But if it's a way to get viewership, then I'm looking at it. Um, this is a way to help, spread the influence of the channel. Um, but yeah, yeah. I think very few of us will ever make partner. Yeah, like making affiliate takes work, and it takes some dedication and stuff like that. But it is way easier than partner, and then above partner, I don't even remember. But once you're partner and above, you get special stuff. Um, I regularly get notified that like I'm in the top 2% of um, programming streamers, which is hilarious because there are people who are really really good, right? You've got like Prime and stuff out there streaming, um, and to be lumped into that category with the numbers that I get seems a little bit hilarious. Um, but you know what? I'll take it. Anyway, thank you. It is about the consistency, and that's where it gets tough. Um, there's a lot. So, like, if anybody out there is interested in streaming or anything like that, feel free to ask in the stream. TBD Gamer is a very veteran streamer, also, um, and we've got other streamers who will show up. So feel free to ask in the chat if you guys ever have questions about streaming. I'm happy to answer them. But TBD Gamer is correct. The most important thing to do with streaming is just be consistent. Hit your dates and your times. And like whenever I've had to travel for for whatever reason, um, I miss a streaming day. It can take weeks to build up those numbers, right? If when I was in Australia and I didn't stream for that whole week, when I came back, my numbers were almost to the same level as when I first started. Um, and then to build that back, you've got to get that consistency. The problem with online media is, people get comfortable visiting you. If you're not there, they're going to find somebody else. Um, And so consistency is the biggest one. Just making sure that you're consistently doing. Anyway, before the stream, I was just curious to see, what, um, how our build is going, and you know, if we've got stuff that's not tree shaking out. And so these three right here, the styles, and then this chunk that includes, Angular core, the signals, and some other like RxJS, and then this is common MJS. This is the Angular common, right? So this is the one of the biggest ones, and then there's some more Angular stuff in here. So this is mostly Angular here, right? We've got RxJS and our styles. The actual code that we're serving is like 2.66K. So our code is causing some stuff to be pulled in. But what was really interesting to me is this chunk right here. So 26K, we managed to get this out of the initial bundle. So this is its own chunk, and this represents the Angular forms. So the way that we've built our application, we've managed to move Angular forms out of this chunk or this chunk, and now it sits by itself. And so this is the power of like lazy loading and deferring and things like that. So we're going to keep talking about that as we keep building. But I would really like to get a lot of this other stuff out of the initial chunk. What would be hilarious is if my initial chunk was over here, at the bottom of this list, along with the styles. Like if all we were serving was 41K in styles and like 3 or 4K. Hey, Marcus, welcome to the stream, man. Thanks for joining us on your Sunday evening. But yeah, if we could get these two chunks out of the initial, I think it would be funny. And I have some ideas on how to do that, and we'll talk about that. I want to do we'll do a stream on that in the future. Like, what are some crazy things that we can do to Angular to get our initial bundle size really, really small, and then, kind of game our core web vitals, right? Which that's one thing that we haven't looked at in a while. Let's go take a look here. And maybe we want to pop this out so that we can see it. So we're serving our application right now. And let's just see like a desktop navigation. Let's just analyze a page load here. And we shouldn't be doing a dev build for this. We really should be serving like a production build. But even with our dev build, we're actually not doing too bad, right? So like our accessibility is pretty good, our SEO is pretty good. Performance is not bad for like Angular applications. Like this application isn't that big. We haven't added in the back end and stuff like that. And I think I really want to build a .NET backend. So I think that's what we're going to do is we're going to use .NET. Hey, Fern of Sigma, welcome. Thanks for stopping by. It's good to see you. But our application, we want to keep this performance score up. And these are the kinds of things like if you take bundle sizes in, like as important as you build your application, and then if you take your performance and your best practices, and you make those part of what you're doing as you build your application, you can make small improvements as these values degrade and fix those, rather than at the end look at it and have this be like a 35 and a 50 and right. So how's the angles? Good question. I've got a little bit of a cold, you might be able to hear, but other than that, I'm doing okay. Just actually really happy to be streaming today. I did mention at the beginning of the stream, I won't be able to stream tomorrow because my ISP Comcast is going to be working on the internet in my area, so it's supposed to be down tomorrow. Um, so I won't be able to do that. But the Angular's coming along really well. And did you guys see? It has been a while. That's been a good while, but I'm really happy to see you here. Um, did you guys see the comment about the talk that Minko gave? Um, you got me. You sniped me already, man. Way to go. But I was just reading this last night, and it was really cool. Let me see if I can find it in my history. Um, yeah, here it is, right here. So this was interesting. Um, and I'll put this in the chat so you guys can read it yourselves when you have time. Um, but Minko gave a talk basically on merging Angular and Wiz. And I want to go find this talk and actually watch it because I was just reading about the reporting on it last night. So he was at .js. And he said that as he was working through, well, you know, this isn't even the one that I read, but as they're working through bringing Wiz and Angular together, he said that basically React and Angular are very much the same in how they handle a lot of stuff. React is way cooler than Angular. So like I know that there's a bit of a rivalry there, but both frameworks do some stuff very well and much better than the other, right? And Signals have allowed Angular to start thinking about Angular differently. And like one of the biggest complaints that I hear regularly about modern Angular is it's starting to look more and more like React. I don't have a problem with that because React is like the most popular framework out there, right? If Angular can grab some mind share, right, some of those brilliant minds that are working on React and have them help out Angular, it's only a good thing for us. So if we can make Angular easy for people to use, it's only a good thing for us, you know, those of us who use Angular. I never troll. React uses hooks, Angular uses classes. Isn't that very different? Yeah, and he actually talked about that, right? Right here, right? React is done with hooks, and Angular it's done with Zone.js. So the interesting thing is the reason Angular uses classes has a lot to do with Zone.js and the DI framework. Like you don't like with Signals, you don't have to use classes, which if you go take a look at Analog and look at their single file components, that's a very functional way of building Angular applications, right? Some of the classes you just can't get away from just because of how the Angular compiler works. But you know, here he is. He's providing an example of different shopping carts, right? Um, so this is um, this is how shopping carts would be built, and most people understand that, hey, this shopping cart has a user profile and a shopping cart. This is very Angular, right? Because we've got a class and we've got the component decorator. It's these decorators that really um, make the classes necessary, and they were set up for the DI and the change detection, right? Um, with signals, this isn't so necessary. However, I caution against moving away from this for the time being, because you want your code base to be understandable by other Angular devs, right? Um, yeah, and that's exactly right. For a Sigma, it's not that they're the same. It's that they're um, it's the way they iterate the DOM. Like this article is actually going a bit more in depth. But when it comes down to it, you're iterating the DOM, you're isolating changes from the DOM, right, and things like that. That is very hard to test, right? Angular seems testable, but not a good idea to travel down that path. Um, Angular was designed to be testable from the very beginning. Um, and Angular has a lot of best practices established around it for testing. So you're not wrong there. I don't know a lot about unit testing. Um, I don't know a lot about unit testing React, because I actually haven't written a React app since 18. Um, and so that's one of the things that I also want to take a look at this year is just, hey, an Angular dev struggles to write a React app. Um, and um, more than anything, I want to explore what React does, and then see if my Angular brain can wrap around what React is doing. Part of it is, cringe streams are always really good, but the other part of it is for me to learn, right? What what I can learn from other frameworks, and I enjoy doing that kind of stuff. Um, Unit test React. I think moving the use effect into a hook is the only way. See, that's interesting, and that's not something that I would have known. So I appreciate that information. The framework war, and simply choose whatever you prefer. Yeah, and that's Wise Man Z. That's a very interesting take. TBD gamer. My code base is barely understandable by me. I get that. Oh, and Michael Small. Angular is becoming way more functional. It is. I've been writing like functional Angular for a long time. Um, and thank you for that, schizophrenic web developer. I love your tag. That very much describes me. I'm very schizophrenic when I'm developing. Um, just constantly shifting modes and attitudes and stuff like that. Love it. Thank you for that. Um, yeah. And you're right. I definitely recommend reading this. Like, if you guys ever get a chance to walk up and shake Minko's hand, do it. Um, he's one of the most approachable people I've ever met. Um, but he is incredibly smart. And he thinks very, very, very deeply about a lot of things. And so I always enjoy my conversations with Minko because I always learn something, right? He's always thinking about things. And sometimes it's not even what he says, but the questions he asks me about what I'm talking about make me think differently about what I'm saying. And that's the thing that, when Minko speaks, he's thought about it for a long time. And so, yeah, definitely you should read this, because I really enjoyed it. And he's not saying that they're the exact same thing, right? What he's saying is the concept of a web framework is very, very, very similar. and you know what Vue does versus Quick versus React versus you know Next versus Angular versus whatever, right? Whatever the next framework's going to be, they're all going to have the same thing, right? They're all going to be components. They're all going to be structuring components some way. They're all going to be handling reactivity between the components, right? How does component A react to data or changes in component B and things like that, right? Um, so I really enjoyed the article, and the one I read was very much more clickbaity, where it just basically the headline was Angular lead says React and Angular are the same thing, right? It's like there's no way Minko said that. But really what he's saying is that, at their most functional parts, that multiple frameworks are doing the same thing. And it really came about because of just the thinking he's been doing as they've been merging Wiz and Angular, which are two different frameworks, but then looking at how are these similar? How can we bring the similarities together? How can we converge those? And then what do we do about the differences, right? Yeah, Marcus, Minko is incredibly smart, and very approachable, right? Probably the hardest part of talking to Minko is usually there's a ton of people around him, but definitely if you ever see him, go shake his hand, say hi, and talk to him about what you're doing. He might have some insight for you. He's always had good insights for me, and I've appreciated it. The JS bundle is much too large. Shipping websites near 10 megabytes. Yeah. And that's we kind of started out with that today, right? Oh, and I shut it down. When we first kicked off the stream. Can I bring that one back up? Come on. There we go. So we started out the stream looking at our bundles here, right? My app isn't that big yet. But if we look, this chunk, and this chunk are library stuff, right? Mostly library stuff. If we look at the stuff that I'm actually doing here, this chunk is, this part of the chunk is 2.66K, right? But the whole chunk includes some more libraries and stuff in it, right? This chunk is the Angular forms. These three chunks are in the initial load, and I would like to get them out. So we're going to take a look at that, because it would be nice to get the initial load down and allow the browser to work in the background, once everything is good and going. And that's why we started looking at the, where did I put that? That's why I started looking at the Lighthouse test, right? So that is not a production build for No Sigma. It is not a prod build. Oh wait, yes, that one is. Sorry, yes, this is a production build. So these chunks are much smaller, and the initial chunk has some stuff from over here in it. I would like to get as much of the code as I write out of the initial chunk. I wonder if you could pull those in 3 separate requests. Yes, Dota 2 attitude. These are being pulled in 3 separate requests, right? And with HTTP 2, because, well, they're 3 separate chunks, right? So they're going to be pulled in 3 separate requests. What will happen is this chunk is the bootstrap chunk. So this chunk is going to be the chunk that is initially loaded. And then inside of this chunk, we have my code, right? And inside of my code is the app config and the app.routes. And then this app component, or actually it's right here. This is the piece that will load the other pieces. Use SSR. And yeah, server-side rendering is another place where we could go, right? SSR is going to shrink that, and that's actually a really good um, that's a really good idea. Schizophrenic web developer. Um, Instead of going really, really crazy, why not use the built-in tools? Um, I like where your head is here, schizophrenic web developer. Um, we will dedicate a stream to turning this application into an SSR application, and see what our bundles and chunk sizes look like then. Because with an SSR application basically does what I was thinking about doing. And I hadn't even thought about it because I don't typically build SSR applications. But with all the work that's gone into like Wiz and Angular, I definitely should think about SSR more. Um, so thank you for that idea. We'll dedicate a stream to turning this application SSR. Um, and then we'll take a look at our bundles, right? And we'll also take a look at how snappy our application is in an SSR context. And we'll also take a look at just avoid dynamic components in general. Maybe the landing page shouldn't have any dynamic components on it. I don't, so you might have to explain some more about that, Dota, too, because I'm not sure if dynamic components in an Angular sense mean the same thing as dynamic components in a React sense. Um, and so if you could explain that a little bit better, I would love to explore the idea. Um, I want to understand what you mean by dynamic components versus like what Angular, like an Angular dev would mean by a dynamic component. It has to be pre-renderable. It does. That is absolutely true. With SSR, it has to be pre-renderable. Um, and so, but Angular has some tools. Like a lot of the stuff I'm using would not be considered dynamic in the Angular sense. Would be client versus server component. And then you guys are really asking great questions today. Hey Ole, welcome to the stream, man. And handling reactivity, checkmate, Angularist. uh, yeah. Um, and anytime I hear somebody say checkmate, I always hear it in Davey 504's voice. And if you guys don't know who that is, um, he does bass guitar on YouTube, but he's got just this very deadpan delivery of humor. A lot of fun to watch. So if I have a profile page with Dota 2 attitude on it, that has to be dynamic. And that is true. That is very true. But the way Angular handles the SSR portion of that is it would render the static parts of the component, and then it comes back through with hydration, and it can partially hydrate parts. But there are other things we can do on the server to make your profile page more static. You do not call that instrument a guitar. Davey will come and slap you. Did I say guitar? I thought I said bass. But yeah, he does slap bass, right? And a very, very, very good bassist. And he's done a bunch of different like hilarious collaborations between like other big musical YouTubers. So yeah, anytime I hear checkmate, that's the voice I hear it in. Oh, I said bass guitar. Oh, did I? That's my fault. Um, Kin, hey, welcome to the stream. Hi, I'm a 15-year-old boy from the UK who wants to get into coding job. You have any advice on how to start or what language to learn? So far, I'm doing mainly cybersecurity. Um, Great question, Kin. Let's see. I was probably 9 or 10 years old when I first started coding. Um, as you can tell from the gray hairs, I've been doing it for a while. I was 9 or 10 years old in 1986 or 1987. So, I'm a child of the 80s. I'm a Gen Xer, right? So fairly old by coding standards. Um, you're starting at a good age. Um, picking a language matters, but not as much as you think it does. Um, I'm trying to be very careful here because I don't want to lead you down a wrong path, but certain languages are better at certain things than others, right? Um, so if you so you know a lot of C++, Python, and C Sharp. Assembly. I started at 12, but I don't know what language to get a real job, if you know what I mean. Okay, so you definitely got like C++, Python, C Sharp, and assembly. Like you're way ahead of the curve for your age, right? It's language will help you get a job. Um, the question is, what kind of job do you want, right? So, like, if you want to do front end web dev, pick up TypeScript, pick up JavaScript, right? HTML, CSS, those are the things that are going to help you get those jobs, right? And then, pick a framework and look, what you want to do is you want to pick the languages that are popular where you want to go. If you want to do back end development work, right? It's largely industry dependent, but C Sharp is going to help you there. Java is going to help you there. Rust, right? Python will even help you there. If you want to do AI, Python's huge, right? And so you've got the basics, right? So software dev is incredibly huge. Cybersecurity is very it's kind of big. Like I worked in cybersecurity a little while ago, and within cybersecurity, you've got people who are working on the front end, right? They're building the interactivity parts of the application. Um, so for the application I worked on, when I joined, they asked, "Hey, how do you think we could get a shell open on any computer anywhere within the organization, whether or not they're behind a firewall?" Um, and so I worked on software that would daisy chain WebSockets from computers anywhere within within that had our agent on it. They could daisy chain to command and control servers. Those command and control servers could daisy chain outside, and so somebody wrote the driver that allowed us to interact with like the Linux shell, the Mac OS X shell, the Windows terminals, right? And that would then communicate with my software, um, and my software would then open WebSockets, right? It was a full stack solution because I was using .NET to do the WebSocket chaining. Um, so all of your skills will translate well there. Rust mentioned, yeah, exactly. Um, you're not meant to laugh when you say Python. Um, did I laugh? I love Python. I am horrible at Python, but I love Python because I run local AIs, right? And a lot of times, the reason I laugh with Python is it is the craziest language to me because a package might work in one environment but not the other, and trying to figure out why can often be a pain, right? I love Python because it's easy for me to get into the code and try and fix things, not knowing Python very well. But man, it can be a pain sometimes. Um, 7 companies that use Axum. Yeah. Um, Slack proof this Python module can run so fast. Yeah, and then wrapping Python and C and stuff like that. But to be serious and answer your question, cybersecurity is a field, right? Within cybersecurity, you're going to have front end developers. You're going to have back end developers. And those back end developers are going to be doing crazy stuff. So the company I worked at, they used C Sharp and .NET for the back end. Um, but there were also a whole bunch of other technologies, right? Because like our biggest client could produce 10 million events an hour. And when you start thinking about events on that scale, 10 million an hour seems low because we were talking about ingesting millions of events per minute. So but millions of events per minute. Let's go there, right? First of all, now you're worried about DDoSing yourself, right? You've got to start solving those issues. And then most databases can't handle ingesting that much that fast without serious sharding, without other stuff like that. And then at that point, once you can ingest that much data, how do you make that data searchable? How do you make that data usable, right? So like there's a whole area of data science and database theory and stuff like that, right? So as I'm looking at your resume, if cybersecurity is something you want to get into, and you want to do like back-end cybersecurity, start looking at like data theory. Start looking at databases. Start looking at high throughput data. That's going to help you quite a bit to just kind of get a leg up and understand the stuff that happens when you've got these agents deployed across large organizations, right? From there, there are other places that you could get into, and this is where like your C++ is going to help because like drivers, right? Like CloudStrike was just in the news because of a messed up driver that blue screened Windows, right? Being able to write drivers that run the software and interface with the kernels of the various operating systems is hugely important. Yeah, exactly. And that's the Python experience. Yeah, Lucene is very very usable. We used Lucene for a while, and MongoDB very scalable. Yep, RabbitMQ. Yeah, all good stuff. Kernel API PTSD exactly. So it's like an apprentice thing. As part of test, I was asked to go in there, SQL database. I managed to do it with simple bad. Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Find something you love. And then do it badly for a long time, right? But just do something you love. Because that's going to teach you way more than learning out of books and stuff like that, right? There's just something from experiencing something breaking and having to fix it that teaches you way more than anything you're ever going to get anywhere else, right? You can come and listen to me talk, but as soon as you see me break something and then have to fix it and maybe struggle and get a bit salty, right, trying to fix it, you'll learn the techniques that I use to try and track things down, right? And those techniques are way more valuable to me than you being able to write in the language that I care about. Debugging techniques, thought processes, theory, those are way more valuable to me at my level when I look for people to employ than can you write React? Can you write Angular? Can you write .NET, right? Can you write can you write an API on the server? Those things can be taught, and To be honest, most companies do it differently. So even if you know how to do it, there's probably some time where you're going to have to learn how they do it, right? Um, and it's been that way my entire career. Every company that I've worked for, there's always a time period where you're just learning how do they do it, right? Because everybody does it differently. Um, so apprenticeship has been good. I've been looking at database mainly with MySQL. That's a good one. I've built a bad QR code that gets into the injects in my. Yeah. Okay. Cool. And yeah, um, those are the kinds of things that you want to do, right? Look into things that you're interested in. Um, and then, like, when you're thinking about jobs, right? Saying software development is a vast, huge, that's a huge topic, right? You could be doing anything from embedded systems, controlling systems on the rovers on Mars to, writing, CRUD websites, right? That's software. It spans everything, right? So narrow it down a bit, right? If you want to do cybersecurity, then you've narrowed it down, right? And then start investigating cybersecurity and look at, hey, you know, what are the languages that are used in cybersecurity? What do I need to know about cybersecurity? And start learning, how that field works, and then the languages that are used in that field. And those are the languages that you should learn. Those are the languages that are going to help you get the job that you want, right? If you want to do game dev, right? Start, investigating the types of games and the companies that build the games that you want to build. Look at what they're using, right? Are they using Unity? Are they using Godot? Are they using, man, it's been a while since I've looked at game engines. Unreal, right? Unreal 5 looks amazing, by the way. And then look at the languages that they're using to interact with those engines and start learning that, right? So that way you're prepared and you understand the language of that culture that you're trying to work around in. That's my best advice for you. I've been investigating cybersecurity. I've just started today posting videos on how I do everything. So tomorrow I am posting a video about how to turn a .exe virus into a PNG image and functional. That's really cool. Very cool. I will tell you right now, videos like what you're doing are going to help you. And the biggest way that they help you is producing content. I've heard it described as mass interviewing, right? Interviewing in public. Because the stuff that I'm doing right now, that anybody can see, anybody can get on my YouTube channel and watch, anybody, right? They can see how I interact with people. They can see, how I write my code. They can see how I solve problems. They can see where I get frustrated, where I don't, right? And it's a big help. So you producing videos is actually going to help you quite a bit. It sounds like you're very interested in cybersecurity. Really good field to go into. And yeah, the languages that you know are going to be hugely beneficial. So it sounds like you've got your head on straight. I think you're headed in a good direction. I mean, at 15, I didn't know what I wanted to. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I'm very, very impressed by just the level of thought you're putting into things. So yeah, keep it up. You're doing well. I think you will, if you keep going the direction you're going, you will land a job doing what you want to do. You're already doing everything you need to be doing. You're showing your passion. You're following your passion, and that passion is leading you to do cool things. And those cool things are going to get you noticed by the people who want to do cool things. So keep it up. You're on the right path. Throwing frameworks at Throwing frameworks at problems and seeing what sticks. Uh, Usually when you throw stuff at other stuff, it's just the crap that sticks, right? It's usually not the good stuff that sticks. Um, so it's okay to be bad. It's okay to be wrong, but acknowledge to yourself that you've made progress. Build your self-esteem. Don't crush it. Ooh, TBD gamer, that's really good advice, right? Um, I totally agree with that advice. Um, Everybody sucks. It's the best way to put it, right? And I don't mean that, everybody's a jerk or an asshole or whatever, right? What I mean by that is that everybody has their blind spots. Everybody has places where they aren't as good as others, right? I've been doing software development for a long time. I still have my weaknesses. There are places where I'm still weak and things that I still don't know, um, right? Acknowledge that, be willing to learn, but also be willing to seek out help, right? Um, and then don't hold yourself to the standard of somebody else, right? Hold yourself to your own bar. And, um, I tell this story quite a bit, but I think it really has made an impact on me. So when my oldest was younger, she did like competitive gymnastics, um, and at that point in time, we thought, she might want to be, on a college team, or, every parent's like, oh, my daughter could be in the like in the Olympics or whatever, right? So the gym that she was going to was a very competitive gym, and they brought in people to talk about, what does it take to be a competitive athlete? What's the mindset and things like that. One of the first things that they brought in a psychologist who works with a lot of college level and professional level teams. Not in gymnastics, but in other sports. Um, and he spoke about players in the NBA and in the collegiate level basketball and stuff like that. Um, and one of the things that will hurt your progress the most is comparing yourself to other people. Um, and so when they get athletes who are very, very dedicated, um, one of the things that they do is take the focus away from others, right? And turn it inward, um, right? Focus on your own talents, and focus on where you can get better. Stop comparing yourselves, to everybody else is going to be better than you. It almost always feels that way, right? So stop worrying about it. You have no control over them. Instead, focus inward. And today today I released a video on turning a virus into a ping. That makes me better than I was yesterday, right? Um, and tomorrow we incrementally get better on this, and then the next day we get incrementally. And um, if you're incrementally improving, right? If you're constantly looking inwards and trying to solve issues with yourself, right? It winds up not being right. If you spend 100 days of getting, 1% better than you were the day before, you're not 100% better after 100 days, right? That's compounded, right? And so it actually, because of the compounding value, right? 1% on day 99 is way bigger than 1% on day one, right? Because the amount that you've improved up to day 99 is, way bigger. And so, um, you know, it it's not like a mortgage, right? Where we can use mortgage formulas and things like that. But the amount of improvement, right, on day 99, that 1% is way bigger than on day one. And on day one, you couldn't have made the same amount of improvement that 1% represents on day 99, right? There's so much there that 1% on day 99 may represent, doubling your skills on day one. Um, and so, keep focusing. Um, yeah. So, and give yourself permission to be bad, right? Give yourself permission to make mistakes. Um, so yeah, I'm going to start posting videos about everything in hopes employers, when I'm old enough, can see like how I make everything, like bad USB zip bombs, AMD hacking. Yeah, perfect. Like you're on the right track. Um, and you may find out that you get a following, um, and that following may lead you in a certain direction too. So well done. Um, I really like, I really like the direction you're going. Anyway, man, I got way sniped today. That was an hour of, um, but yeah, thank you guys for the questions. When I say man, I got way sniped, that's nothing about you guys. That's me commenting on this. I thought we would be doing a Vin decoder today, and that. So like TBD gamer can probably sympathize here. Um, in the very beginning of when I first started streaming, when you're mostly streaming to yourself and you don't have followers and nobody's there, um, you start with an idea and you finish that idea. Um, the more active chat is, the less I know I'm going to finish my idea. I don't care. Like I actually really love the interactions. And so I appreciate you guys. Like Ken, it was awesome to have you join and ask questions. And please feel free to ask questions. I love it. And they don't even have to really be on topic, right? Because um, the reason I started streaming is not because I think I'm a genius programmer. The reason I started streaming is I felt like I could help people level up their careers and even just start careers and things like that. So I like to use streaming like Angular as a vehicle to talk about things that will help you in your career. So definitely feel free, you guys, to ask questions. Definitely feel free to make comments. I'm loving the humor in the chat today. Just amazing. So thank you. You guys are doing awesome. And I really love the community that we've built here. You guys are. Am I into vehicles? So a bit, not as much as when I was younger. Am I using Windows? Yes, I use Windows. This is my personal laptop. It's the laptop that I do gaming and stuff on. And most of my career I've been on Windows. It's just recently that I've started using Mac. Yeah, it definitely helped me. I feel much more knowledgeable, and I feel I know what direction I need to go well more than. Well, thank you. I'm glad that I helped. And you are very knowledgeable. Like it's easy to think you don't know much, especially when you sit in isolation. Um, so once you start reaching out and getting into the community, you'd be surprised at how far ahead you are of even like some junior developers, right? So you've got a very solid base, and it sounds like you know what you're doing, which is also very, very good. Right? So like the stuff you're writing about, some of it I understand what you're talking about, some of it I don't. I worked mainly on front end in cybersecurity, so I picked up a little bit of stuff, talking to the kernel guys and things like that. But and then just the stuff we had to know about. But it sounds like you're very knowledgeable. With respect to vehicles, when I was younger, I was into like stereos and racing and stuff like that. So I do like vehicles. I don't do it as much as I did back then. Now I mainly just buy vehicles that are functional, that will get me from point A to point B. Back when I was younger, I worried about, if I really want to swap the engine, which one's going to have the best engine swaps, and if I pull out the headers and I replace the headers with these headers, I'm going to get this much more flow, and I need to really look at my turbo and I've got to adjust my chip. I need to adjust the timings on my, my spark plugs. Oh, my spark plugs have the wrong connector type, things like that. Um, so, um, can you beat my vehicle guessing game? Maybe, maybe. I'm new to the channel. Do you work on web components? I saw you have most of your content around Angular. Um, when you talk web components, you're talking about the actual web component spec, right? So I have done web components. I've done a little bit in lit. I don't tend to do web components because web components didn't. Um, yeah. Okay. Dude, don't. It's not a it's not a snipe. Don't worry about it. Well, send me your guessing game. DM me on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And send me your guessing game. Um, and I'll take a look at it, and um, then I won't run all the way through it, but I'll take a look at it, and we'll take a look at it on stream. I just don't want to pull up something that I don't know what it is. Um, if you follow me on Twitter, you can just DM me, and that will work. Or LinkedIn. It sounds like I just got a LinkedIn message. Maybe that was you. I'll take a look at it after the stream. Um, and would Twitch, yeah, that would be fine too. Absolutely. Feel free to whisper on Twitch. But yeah, the material by Google. So when web components were first released, um, I thought they were going to be like a silver bullet, right? Um, the biggest problem with web components is that they suffer from a lot of the same problems that like MFEs suffer from, and just a lot of other things, right? Once you start building anything that's non-trivial, um, they're no longer a silver bullet, right? Um, and there are a lot of times where a web component may not work as well as you want it to, like slot projection, and DOM isolation, um, and then just unit testability can become a huge issue with web components. Um, so early on, we were huge and excited about web components. Lately, I'm not as big into them. I'll go back and revisit them every once in a while, but like web components work okay for like if you want to build a drop down, they work pretty good for that. If you want to build a date picker, web components work pretty good for that, right? Um, if you want to build something that interacts with a database or anything like that, well, now you're starting to bring along a whole lot more than just your web component. And if you have a bunch of web components that do that, then you're bootstrapping that same whatever it is, right? Over and over and over again. And it starts to get expensive, right? Which is kind of the same thing that you can run into with MFEs. Um, and so at that point, it's better to look at, well, maybe I should just build build an application in a framework and provide that application as, like a SaaS or something like that, right? Instead of the web components. So hopefully that answers your question. I like the idea of web components. Oh, I'd have to receive a message from you first. Okay. Let me I've never actually. Oh, Emmy. Nope, that's not it. Sorry, I'm just looking for the messaging stuff here to how to allow it. Um, just do it here. There we go. That worked. Nope, that didn't work. I'll need to figure it out. So Arun, that's probably a good idea. I definitely need to work on the channel more. Um, but don't feel bad about asking questions. Um, so like your question's not bad. Um, and um, it gives a chance to discuss the technology that you're asking about, right? And you know, if people disagree, I also would love to hear it. But right now, my opinion of web components is there's a lot of potential, but they just haven't delivered on the promise that they made. And that's why we don't see web components everywhere, right? There's a lot of work that's going into them still, and I still think there's a lot of potential. So I still follow web components, but I don't create web components so much myself. Um, but I'll take a look at putting together some videos or something on the channel. That's a good idea. Um, I need to get into creating shorts based on stuff from the streams that people have watched the most, just so people can easily access that stuff too. On the Twitch header, there is a chat icon. I'm trying to do it from inside of Streamlabs, um, and there's the header here, but it's not allowing my whisper. Let's go. Let's actually go over to Twitch. Um, so here, if I whisper here, okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, that was a good idea. Thank you for sending me that direction. Um, that worked right away. So, do you think cybersecurity is future-proof? Because I'm soon thinking that web dev will be taken over by lots of AI due to it being able to make such accurate and high-performance websites. I think the same could happen with cybersecurity. Totally agreed with what proposed part. Do you like CSS? I love CSS. Absolutely love CSS. And in fact, the last stream I was recommending that anybody who watches my stream go check out Kevin Powell on YouTube. He's my absolute favorite CSS YouTuber. So much fun to watch, and that's where I learn a lot of my CSS from. But absolutely love CSS. Do I future proof in AI? That's so here's my spiel on AI, and I've worked with a lot of LLMs. I've built, I've fine-tuned LLMs. I've built bots that communicate with LLMs. Um, that's kind of a hobby that I've had lately. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert, but you know, the one thing that you'll get from me is opinions. LLMs and AI right now, as it stands, are really amazing at producing stuff that they've seen before. And they're incredible at taking stuff that they've seen before and putting it together in unique ways that it makes it look like they're creating new things, right? But a good example of this would be to go to like any of your favorite image producing AIs, right? And ask them to produce a creature that you come up with in your head, right? Maybe it's got the claws of a lobster and the tail of a platypus, and the face of a monkey and the body of an eagle. Who knows, right? Just silly stuff like that. Ask the LLM or ask the AI to produce that, right? Or even crazier, come up with a unique alien idea or something like that, and ask the LLM to produce that alien in its home habitat. And you'll find very, very quickly that it starts producing the same stuff over and over again because it's at the edge of what it knows and it doesn't really understand. And it gets even worse when you start doing like the chimera type stuff, right? It's the same with LLMs that produce text and code. They're very, very good at producing code that they've seen before. But once you get the LLM out of its comfort zone, so to speak, and you start asking it to do stuff it's never seen before, it doesn't work. So even if, and I think this is the case already, right? So I think that this has already happened with things like Copilot and Claude and things like that. Even if AI generates 60 to 70% of the code, there's still that 30 to 40% that needs a human that understands what's going on to interact with it. Will AI overtake that eventually? Who knows, right? I don't know. Like, 5, 10 years ago, before transformers were such a big thing, I wouldn't have thought that LLMs could do what they do now, right? So transformers were a huge change in the way that AIs work. If if we reach like general artificial intelligence levels, right, where AIs can start producing concepts on their own, then it is likely that a lot of jobs will disappear. The jobs that are at the biggest risk of disappearing with the current AI technology that we have are the jobs that are easily automatable, right? The ones that can be done the same way over and over again, and that very little changes from time to time, right? With programming, there's a concept of context, and AIs don't have as much context as you might think they do. So they aren't as smart about your code as you think they are. They're very smart about the local code, but like an overall code base or even the domain of the code that you're writing, they aren't smart about that. Until context gets better, that's always going to be the case. So you're always going to need a developer who can tell the AI and help direct the AI. And I think that will even be the case in if AI start writing 90 to 100% of the code, there's always going to need to be somebody, right? We've got prompt engineers now, people who are better at getting AIs to do things than others. That may be the role of programmers in the future, right? The downside to that is that a lot of what juniors used to do is being squeezed out by AI. And so there is a big downside to that. But I wouldn't worry about future proofing based on what AI is going to do because I don't really think anybody really knows what that means. The best way you can future proof your career um, is don't focus on the languages, don't focus on the technologies. Learn the languages and technologies to be employable, but the best place to focus is on theory. The best place to focus is on architecture. The best place to focus is, on design patterns and things like that. Those things translate across frameworks. They translate across languages. They translate across disciplines, right? Understanding DDD is going to help you in embedded systems. It's going to help you in front end development. It's going to help you in back end development. It's going to help you in game development. It's going to help you in driver development, right? Those concepts are going to help everywhere, right? Understanding, the differences between functional and object oriented and, procedural and when is the best time to use them is going to make you much more employable than if you focus solely on object oriented or solely on functional or solely on procedural. The same with declarative versus imperative. There are times for both. And understanding how the computer interacts with databases, how it interacts with the with the internet, things like that. Those translate across disciplines. And they make you way more future proof and way more employable than the area that you go into, right? Like if your area disappears, but you have a strong grounding, you can find your feet in another area. However, if you focused your entire life on just what's within that area, when it disappears, it becomes way more difficult for you to get on your feet and find something else. Yeah, methods and techniques, and theory, right? So the theory is the biggest piece that you can really dedicate. Okay, let's back up, right? Early on in your career, you should focus on learning the basics, right? What's a variable? What's an array? What are loops? What are sentinel variables? What are guard clauses? What are, right? Very, very basic stuff. You need that grounding, right? It's the fundamentals. And you hear people talk about like, in any sport, they'll always talk about, you need to be grounded in the fundamentals. It's the same with, professional computer programming. You need to be grounded in the fundamentals. You need to understand how those fundamentals work, right? Scoping, things like that, right? Global versus local scoping and things like that. All of those are very, very important to understanding bigger concepts. So very, very early on in your career, you need to get very, very good at understanding the fundamentals. Or in your, not in your career, but in just learning, programming. Get very, very good at those fundamentals. And pick a language that does those fundamentals well. And most of the popular languages today do, right? My first language was BASIC. BASIC doesn't do those fundamentals well. It does some well, but not others. Once you got the fundamentals down, now it's time to get into theory, right? And some of the best places to start with theory are like design patterns because they're going to shift the way you think about coding, right? I don't think you should learn design patterns because you need to know how to implement design patterns. I think you should learn design patterns because design patterns give developers a common language to talk about how we're going to write our code, right? So, if I start talking about like a facade pattern or a decorator pattern or a bridge pattern, people who understand design patterns know what I'm talking about. They also know that everything I talked about right there is a way to hide, abstract away, specific cases behind something that we can communicate right with in the same way. So they understand that what we're trying to do is hide the details of whatever we're trying to communicate with behind something that allows my program to interact with it in the same way, so that I can switch that something out at any point in time. And most of my program doesn't care. It just keeps communicating with, the facade or the bridge or the decorator or whatever, right? And so design patterns become a way for you to level up your thinking about the code. Not necessarily do I need to implement the exact design pattern. It's more, how do I think about the code and how do I communicate the code, right? Once you've gotten to that point, then it's time to start getting into things like DDD, domain-driven design. And it's time to start getting into the deeper concepts of like functional programming, right? Like currying, like monads, like partial application, things like that, that really change the way you think about your code. But it's a progression, right? You start very, very simple with the fundamentals, and then you progress and you progress and you progress. And those types of things are going to keep you way more employable, regardless of language, regardless of technology, than if I spent a whole bunch of time just learning React right now, right? And to learn those concepts and implement them and understand them, you're going to have to learn languages anyway. And so that, that is my opinion there. Have you ever given a thought, if objects and arrays are objects in JS, then what's the difference fundamentally? Oh yeah, I have Gang of Four book. Yeah, the Gang of Four book is getting beaten up a lot right now. But the Gang of Four book has a phrase in it that is forever burned into my brain, that I think about quite often. And that phrase is favor composability over inheritance. And it talks about, how do you make your code composable, right? Whether or not you implement any of the Gang of Four patterns ever doesn't matter to me. If you read the book and you understand the theory behind the book and you go and you implement some of the patterns in the book, you're already thinking about code differently than somebody who's only ever worked in a framework, or who's only ever, just written, code based on tickets in a system somewhere. You're already moving beyond that, right? So yeah, the Gang of Four book, I think, is a good book. So Arun, have you ever given thoughts, if objects and arrays are objects in JS, then what's the difference fundamentally? So in JS, everything's an object, right? Your functions are objects, strings are objects, numbers are objects, arrays are objects. Everything inherits from objects, right? In JavaScript. And actually ECMAScript now, right? Yes. Fundamentally, that's the way it is all the way down in ECMAScript, right? But we can say that a string is fundamentally different than a number, even though they both inherit from object, right? It's the same way with object versus array. Objects have specific characteristics about them that are different than the way arrays work, right? The way they're implemented underneath doesn't matter so much, but arrays are a computer science concept, right? And so if we think about a single dimensional array, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about a segment of memory that's been blocked out to hold certain amounts of things, right? In ECMAScripts, arrays tend to be more like lists from other languages than they do tend to be arrays. Because in most other languages, arrays are a set size. And if I want to change the size of an array, I have to allocate a new array and then copy the old array into the new array, and then I have a bigger array, right? So you applied the observer exactly right, and we use the observer pattern in Angular all the time, um, right? RxJS is the observer pattern applied to reactive streams. Um, that's why they're called observables, right? And one of the things that when you set up an observable, you can have an observer that observes the, so the observer pattern is hugely powerful. It's used everywhere. It's a great pattern. But the arrays have specific things about it, right? And when we talk about multidimensional arrays, right, it's now we're talking about like a two-dimensional array is something of a set size that holds a certain type of thing, and then we have multiple of them, right, of a set size. When we go three-dimensional, now we've got multiple of those, right? And so fundamentally, arrays are different because they can only be iterated. Like you can do random access of arrays by accessing the index, right? But arrays have iterators, and they can be iterated forward and backwards. They can be randomly accessed by index and things like that, right? So they do share some similarities with the way objects work in ECMAScript, JavaScript, but I think a lot of that has to do with how everything is an object. And so when they created arrays, they were able to add certain things to objects, right? So like you can iterate object keys, but there's some weirdness with that, right? The order of the iteration in some versions of ECMAScript was not guaranteed to be the same order every time. Whereas with an array, it's always guaranteed to be the same order every time. And in languages with arrays, right, arrays are always numerically indexed, right? So 0 to the size of the array in JavaScript. Some languages, it's 1 to the size of the array, right? So in a 0-based, it's size of the array minus 1. In 1-based languages, it's 1 to the size of the array. But fundamentally, they're different concepts, right? Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Arun? Yeah, that's a good question. And thinking about things that deeply is important, right? Anyway, got a half hour. We decode a VIN. Where we ended up last time, right, is we were talking about our state and our service. And right now we can see that if I change this and then we decode, right, we can tell our decode button is really just trying to say, hey, you decode it. You tried to decode this in the model. It's not actually calling the backend. Oh my goodness, schizophrenic web development. How do closures work? Now you're getting into like deeper, darker magic, right? Let's take a look like here. We've got an anonymous function, right? This anonymous function is what computes. I never finished looking at this. We'll look at this some other time, right? This anonymous function is what computes this, right? That's what creates this display up here. So it takes the year, the make, and the model of the vehicle and concatenates them together as a string. So this anonymous function relies on this variable that's passed in through this anonymous function, right? So this variable is required for this function to work, right? What does that mean in the terms of JavaScript, right? Well, if this variable goes out of scope, it could be cleaned up. However, we've got a function that relies on that variable, and it may not go out of scope, right? Because we're returning an object here that has a function that relies on this variable here, right? This creates a closure. And the best way to think about a closure is basically what happens is, and we're simplifying here, right? If you really want to learn how closures work, you need to go study a bit more. But this is like the high level TLDR. This is kind of how closures work, right? So what we can think about here is that because this function relies on this variable, JavaScript or ECMAScript has to basically build a container, and in that container exists this function, but it also contains a reference to this variable, right? Because it needs to capture everything that this function refers to. And the notion of that container is a closure. That closure is this function and then everything from the state of the program when it was created that this function needs to work, right? What does that do? Well, that basically adds, because store is an object, that basically adds a reference to store, right? And so if store goes out of scope and the garbage collector comes along to sweep away unused memory, right? It looks at store and it says, hey, do you have anybody referencing you? Store goes, oh yeah, there's this closure that's still referencing me, right? And so the garbage collector just moves on, right? But that's the notion of a closure. Really, closures are pretty simple. It's just you've got a function, and that function refers to something outside of the function, right? Because store is not in the function. It's not a parameter to the function. So, we're accessing store here. If we wanted to get rid of the closure, and this doesn't work with computed, I don't think, because I don't think we can put like state here, right? What does state become in this case? Yeah. So computed expects, a function of a certain look, right? It can't have any parameters and it has to return something. So we can't add something here. But if, we're kind of required to do a closure here, just because of the rules of computed. But if we wanted to get rid of this closure, we could have this return a function, right? That takes in whatever we wanted. And then so like this function here, this function doesn't have a closure because store is passed into the function and store is referenced inside of the function, and there's nothing in this function that references a variable outside of the function. So, the V8 engine knows that, hey, I don't have to create a closure for this, but for this I do, right? Does that understand? State management. My state management tool that I'm using is the Signal Store from NGRX Signal Store. I have been looking at TAN-stack query, and it's one that I want to do more with in the future. I'm also looking at XState. There's a friend of the channel, Jan Nicholas Wortman, who he is working on an Angular version of XState. But for this project, we're using Signal Store, which is an amazing tool. I'll get you a link to it. So so this is the link to Signal Store. And Signal Store has some cool features to it that allow us to do some amazing things with compositional state. So I highly recommend Signal Store. Yeah, let's see. Isn't enclosure about the function being defined within another function, which is normally for like data privacy and stuff? So an enclosure versus a closure. So a closure is a computer science term, and it refers to the container that's created to make this function work. Some languages don't give the ability to create closures, right? If you can't create anonymous functions in a language, then you won't have closures, and so you may not have encountered them in the past. I'm trying to think. So, like the languages you use, like C, C++, you would probably use a pointer to a function. I don't know if C++ can do closures. I don't know enough about C++. With C Sharp, you can definitely get closures. And in C Sharp, they're called handlers, right? It's been a while since I've written C Sharp, but are they events or event? And what are they called when you can pass a function to a function in .NET? Yeah, the composability of Signal Store is crazy. But basically, it requires you to be able to create an anonymous function, dynamic, right? That's the term I'm looking for in .NET. Dynamics in .NET wind up being quite often. Am I right on this, Marcus? If Marcus is here, Marcus can probably correct me because he's writing a lot of C# right now. But I think dynamic just says that turn off the type checking for this. What am I thinking of? It's been a while since I've written C#, but C# definitely has it, and you can definitely create closures in C# because you can have functions declared inside of other functions. And that's really what it takes. Like having a function declared within a certain scope, it doesn't have to be other functions, right? Like here, we just happen to be inside another function, but it doesn't have to be. A closure just needs to be a function that refers to some variables or state outside of itself that forces the compiler, or the runtime to create that closure, right? That container that keeps all of the stuff that function needs to run in scope. So hopefully that helps. I'm pretty sure these are called captures. Yeah, captures is another synonym for closure. Closure and captures are synonymous. But that's what we're talking about when we talk about closure. The closure really refers to the container that's needed for this anonymous function to work. And so when you're talking about closures, a lot of times people will call this a closure. This is the anonymous function. The fact that we have variables outside that we're referring to are what create the closure that this anonymous function needs to run, right? And this isn't really necessarily a closure because we find a place where, so like here we could do, we could have var test, or let's not do var. I don't want to get into that habit, but const test equals 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then here we can just do for we'll go 1 to 10. But here we can just do function, and here we can do test, right? And we can do console.log test, and here we can do test, and we can do I. And I need to do const, and we'll just do this. So now we've created a function inside of a for loop that has a closure that takes in this variable, and then the I from the current variable, and then down here, right, we can call test, boom. And so we've created a closure, right? So with this code, we've created 10 closures, right? Because we go through this 10 times, and we're creating a closure around I, and we're creating a closure around test, right? So our closure winds up being quite big. How do we get rid of the closure? Well, we can do, inside of here, we could do test val, right, which is a number. And we can set it equal to test. And then here we can do I val, which is a number, set it equal to I. And then inside of here, we can do test val and I val, right? And so now we've gotten rid of the closure, because everything inside of this function relies on parameters passed into the function. And even though we've got a default set here, right? That default is only evaluated here, so it doesn't create a closure, right? It just says that, hey, when you call this, the default is this or this, right, and this. And so we've no longer got a closure, and instead, we've got a function that can print these out, right? The benefit to this is that, if I made test an object, right? And here we can just say num val number, right, equals test. With a closure, this test would still refer to the test here. And actually, the way we've written it right now, it still does, right? Because this is passed by reference. So we've still got a reference here. We could break that reference by cloning it or doing something internally, right? But one of the problems that you can have with closures, and the benefit here, well, not so much here, but in other places where you get rid of closures, is that we break the reference to test, right? And by breaking that reference, and the garbage collector can go through and clean stuff up. And so hopefully that answers your questions. All right, cool. I'm glad that answers your question. Okay. So we're looking at our store here. And our store includes a custom feature, right? And this is the composability of Signal Store, is that we've written custom features that are used here. So the Vin decoder is actually a custom feature. So it can exist. It doesn't have to exist, but it can exist. And this is where the composability comes in. But right now, we've got our empty Vin decode state, and we've got a computed that's got our error message in it. And then we've got our decode VIN. And right now, all our decode VIN is doing is just patching the state with, you tried to decode. So one of the things we want to do right here is we want to return if we get this error. And then we want to take this out. And let's go ahead and add a call to the feature or to the service that we're using to decode this VIN. And right now we don't have a reference to that service. So we're going to need to add a reference to the service for it to work. Let's do that. To do that, we need to change this just slightly. We're going to do that. Actually, we need that, but we need to take this one off, right? It's this one. Is that the right one? The green. Actually, the faster way to do this, put it back. And then here we go find that blue. Boom, we put, hello? I do. We go here, boom. And then we do a return here. And that solves it for us. So now we're returning a new object, but this gives us the ability to inject some stuff in here. So in Angular, anytime we call inject, it needs to run in the injection context, right? Which is typically a constructor context. You can run it at other times, but we want to run it in the injection context. The other thing we want to do is we want to take a look at our service. So the service we want to inject is this VIN decoder service. So we'll do that. And this is an interesting I'm thinking here, and if we go look at ng extension, right? And if we do an inject lazy, we could lazily inject this service because it's only ever going to be used in this VIN decoder. So we could set up this import in our class. And then we could do an inject lazy here. And that would make it so that this service is lazily loaded into our VIN decoder when we need it. Let's do that. I like that idea. So VIN decoder directive, no, VIN decoder feature. So up here, we can just say, hey, go take a look. We need to create this importer here. And it's just an import with a .then on it. So here we can just say, hey, import, or we can say const import vin decode service equals, and here we need to, just want to make sure, so it is an anonymous function. So we just add the anonymous function, and we just say, hey, import that dot then, and then we're going to return the m dot vin decode service. And doesn't like this. Why? Cannot find module vin decode service. Well, let's try finding it then. So it is from dot slash services slash vin decode service. And then m dot vin decoder service. So we need an R in here. So now we've got a lazy importer for our vin decoder service, which is going to allow this service to not be bundled inside of our vin decoder. Which, again, going back to what we were talking about in the beginning, the bundler can make intelligent decisions about where things should be imported. Like we can import this piece, right, the vin decoder, into our feature, but we don't have to import this service until we actually call down here. So now what we can do is inside of our function here, we can get our vin decode service, right? And so if we look, we can just do inject lazy, and then so this returns an observable, it looks like. Lazily load a service or any kind of Angular provider. Lazy loading services is useful when we want to shrink the bundle size. Yeah. Inject lazy accepts a function that returns a promise of the service. The function will be called only when the service is needed. It can be a normal dynamic import or a default dynamic import from a module. So if I'd exposed the service as the default, then we could use this one. But since we don't, then we use this one. So we've got the service. So let's inject lazy. Let's just see what we get. So we say const vin decoder service equals that. So vin decoder service is a promise. Which means we change that tap over to a switch map. we could go here and go switch map this. And here it's complaining because we aren't returning the right stuff, right? Yeah. So then down here, and here we could just throw new error that, and we'll clean this up here. That's going to prevent us from hitting that point. And then here, actually, I don't want to, do I want to throw? I don't know. Right now, what we'll do is we'll just return of empty. And so then down here, what we can do, well, we'll add a filter later. So right now, what we want to do is we can return, and if we look, it's interesting that they're just calling inject lazy. So we do the inject lazy here. We switch over to the inject lazy. So instead of that, we do Vin decoder service dot, right? That just returns a promise. We don't want this here, which means we really didn't. Actually, we do. This is where it gets a little bit crazy because this has to be run in an injection context. And so we're going to run it here. But can we pipe this? Yeah, it doesn't like that. But what we can do is we can do from, because from knows how to turn a promise into an observable. Then we can pipe that into our switch map. Is that what they were doing in there? So like here, ng on init, inject lazy dot pipe switch map. Like their inject lazy is returning an observable. On the browser, what did I type you? So it's interesting that theirs seems to be returning inject lazy data service import, and it's just that. Oh. I did it wrong. This inject lazy. I missed this piece. And then we take that off. That should give me back an observable. Perfect. Which is why they're adding the $sign to the end of it. So actually, we don't want to do this here, because that's going to be like, as soon as we add this, it's going to use it. Instead, what we want to do is we want to grab the injector here. So what we can say is we can say const injector equals inject the injector, right? So that'll give us a reference to the injector, so we can run this in an injection context. So now we've got our injector here, and then here we can just say, hey, return inject lazy. Yeah, there we go. So now we've got the import Vin decoder service lazily injected. So inside of here, we can now say, hey, this is our service. And we're going to do something with it, right? And this also needs to be a switch map. Is that right? There we go. So we're not using service. It's fine. We'll get that fixed up. Yeah, and we can just return service.decode Vin. Boom. And so now we've got a lazily injected service into our stuff. That's me forgetting I've got a snagging wire resting on my phone while working. Okay. um, yeah. Someone fooling around with the NG extensions docs, the snippets sometimes don't quite add up. Don't blame them. When I was working on a feature, I went between code and markdown. The end result was code that didn't work and the markdown for, yeah, I don't blame them. Like NG extensions is put together for free. And so a lot of times, and again, it was me not doing it right, right? I was calling the import, which is a promise, when I really needed the inject lazy. Enea wrote this one, huh? That's cool. So now we're returning the decode Vin. Oh, I'm not using the injector. This will actually fail because I need to add the injector to it. Boom. So there we go. Now we've got our injector in there and we're good. So the last thing we want to do is just down here, we're going to add a filter. Did I already have filter in? How does it know what filter is right now? Within my RX method, got that. We've got the switch map that ends there. The filter needs to go up. So the filter goes here. And yeah, now it doesn't know what filter is, but we'll grab it from RxJS. And then we'll just filter response. And we'll just say, hey, response is not equal null. That doesn't like here. Oh, pipe. You need to pipe all this stuff. Otherwise, it doesn't know what to do with it. So we'll import pipe. There we go. And now it knows what's going on, so we're good. So now we've filtered out any response that's null. So here, now we should be able to just tap on our response. So we'll go ahead and grab tap. So at this point, response is never. Oh, this needs to be a not equal null. Now the type of response should be an object. And that's what decode vin returns. Yep. So now we can console.log response, and we can also hatch state. No, let's not do that. We'll just console log it for right now. And see what we get. The other thing we should do is right here, this should be a tap response. And the reason for that is tap response changes the way we need to handle this. For tap response, we also need to provide an error handler, or we can provide an observer. So here, whoops. We can say that this is our next. Actually, we'll just do it this way, right? Next, boom. And it's still going to complain because we don't have an error handler here. But we can just say, hey, error is error in console error. So tap response forces us to have a next and an error response, which will keep our it will keep our with methods from dying. So there we go. So now, if we go back here, and let's bring up this and go to our console. We're going to dock it to the side. Oh, and this is the wrong one, so we can close it here. Let's go to our modular state and bring up our console. And so now if we hit decode vin, it got called. Oh, what happened there? No provider for HTTP client. Yep, that's on us. That was a refresh of the build happening, but we aren't injecting HTTP client, so we'll get that fixed. The build all happened. So let's go get our HTTP client in place. So to do that, we're going to go to our application config, and we're going to provide HTTP client. And are there any features we want in here? With component input batch. I don't think there are any right now. One thing I didn't do that we may take a look at in the future is the binding inputs to parameters. So right away, we know that things worked out because we got our response. If we go take a look at the network tab, network, at the bottom, we should see right here, this is our call. This is our call to the service, right? So we called the NHTSA with this VIN. We asked for a JSON VIN back. Yeah, so we asked for that. We didn't send any payload over, and the response we got back is this big giant message. So right away, right, we're getting an array of values back. It's already telling us that, hey, the 9th digit doesn't calculate properly. And so it went and calculated it with a different check. It added a star there. I thought we'd figured out what that needed to be. But it's added the destination market. The make is Chevrolet. Manufacturer is General Motors. The model is a Silverado. It's a 2022. It was built in Fort Wayne. So it was built in Indiana. The series is the 1500 and the trim is the LT. Got a truck body. Yeah, Indiana. All the extra trims, body classes pickup. It's not giving us anything on doors, windows, but we can now go through and pull this data out. The 9th position does not calculate properly. I thought it had suggested one before. But anyway, we're getting errors. But if we look, we're actually decoding the VIN against the we're decoding the VIN against the service, right? Which is awesome. Yeah. So I'm hoping to get ng extension hosted in that new stack looks docs thing where you can. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, I know you weren't saying that I did. So definitely appreciate that. But anyway, here we go. So now we're getting the decode, and it's working. It's working. It's working. I didn't hate the prequel Star Wars as much as other people. So maybe I'm not a true Star Wars fan, but but they're saying that there are 136 results for this VIN. So we need to figure out how to parse this and get what we want out of it. So that's going to be the next. It is like, how do we parse this? And I've got. So they follow this value ID variable and then variable ID. So they all follow this same pattern. And variable ID is a number, but the other 3 are strings. And I actually need to end, unfortunately. We'll pick this up tomorrow. Because what I want to do this um, is I want to take a look at the library. I think I have it bookmarked over here. Um, where is it? The superstruct. Yeah. So in the past, I've used type or I've used Zod for this stuff. This time around, I want to try. Is it superstruct? Let me just see. I've got another one in here. Um, also got archetype and there are a couple of there are a couple typing libraries I want to check out. Let's see. There's that one. There's this one. And there is this one. So, superstruct um, the superstruct allows you to use like objects, right? And arrays and things like that. Um, we've got object here. Here we're saying that, hey, this has to be an array. Um, the superstruct is fairly similar to Zod, which I liked. Archetype, I think. Here they're using type. I don't know. Archetype seems just a little bit crazy because you do types and then name, string, age, number. No, I guess it's not. So I don't know. I think I had kind of weeded out archetype. Then there was typia. Um, and this is also built on this was called something else before, but it's able to assert that certain things meet certain parameters. And I found this one interesting. So, um, like the validate function here, so here we've got this and export interface failure, error. It's validating this. And this looks interesting because with Typia, it looks like we can use just normal. Maybe we'll try this one out. But what I want to do is use one of these functions to validate the return JSON. Maybe we don't need to. We'll think about that. Maybe we don't need to, but that's kind of a preview of what I want to do next. Is I really want to take a look at just parsing through this, but I mean we've already got it parsed. We already know that it's a string number. But that doesn't mean that TypeScript does. That's the issue we've got, right? It just thinks it's an object. So that's where I was thinking that. So getting that validated and making sure that it is a string number is going to be important for our code. So we'll take a look at that. I think Typia is going to be the way we're going to go. But thank you guys. You guys were amazing. I really appreciate all the really good questions. My internet is out tomorrow. Thank you for the reminder. My internet is out tomorrow, so it will be Thursday. Thank you for that reminder. I had already forgotten. My internet will be out tomorrow. I won't be streaming tomorrow. I will be streaming on Thursday at 5:30, where we'll take a look at handling the types and how to pull this data out, right? Because there are only certain things that we care about. So I'm curious, like going through all 136 responses. There's a lot here. We'll have to take a look at it and see how we want to handle it. I don't think 136 responses is going to be that big of a deal. So we'll return, well, maybe the service itself will know how to return a specific shaped vehicle, and then we won't have to worry about it. So we'll take a look at that. But that will be Thursday. Again, thank you guys so much, and we will see you next time.